Welcome to those who are joining us for the first time, and welcome to our monthly scholars. Welcome to the McMaster Children and Youth University's very first online lecture. Our topic today is Sun, Snow, and Seals, Studying Seals to Save Humans by Dr. Thomas Hawke. This is the first part of a three-part lecture series with Dr. Hawke. Today, Dr. Hawke will be talking to us about his journey to Antarctica, his research on seals there, and what seals taught him about how to design better medicines for people who are sick. Dr. Hawke is an associate professor in the Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine at McMaster University. Pathology is the science of the causes and effects of diseases, especially the branch of medicine that deals with examining samples of body tissue in a lab. Dr. Hawke has been a professor at McMaster University since 2009. In his lab, he studies both human and rodents with a primary goal of translating his rodent findings to the human condition. In Dr. Hawke's spare time, he has a lot of interests he likes to explore. He can be found playing sports, coaching sports, doing art, building things. He loves being active and trying new things. We hope you enjoy our lecture today. Please stay tuned for part 1 of Dr. Thomas Hawke's lecture, Sun, Snow, and Seals, Studying Seals to Save Humans.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, I guess, for some of you, but for me, it's definitely morning. My name is Dr. Tom Hawke, and I'm going to talk to you today about research that I did in Antarctica on these cool animals right here that you can see in this picture, the Weddell seal. But before I talk to you about the Weddell seal research, I want to teach you a little bit about Antarctica and some really cool facts about Antarctica, and then talk a little bit and show you some pictures about what it was like to live and do research in Antarctica. So we'll break this talk into some smaller blocks, which will make it a bit easier for you to understand and to gain some insight into what is Antarctica, what is it like to live and do research there, and then at the end we'll talk about the Weddell seal. The first thing we need to figure out is where is Antarctica, and I'm sure most of you know that it is way down here at the bottom of the globe, or our map here in Antarctica. There we are there. But if you aren't sure where we are on a map, we are way up here in North America in this little area of southern Ontario in Hamilton. An important thing to know about Antarctica is that it is surrounded by the Southern Ocean, which is essentially the southern extensions of the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, and the Indian Ocean. And so the entire continent of Antarctica is surrounded by ocean. And unlike other continents, such as North America, when the wind blows around the Earth, it hits other land masses, other continents, before it gets back to North America again. And that's a bit different than Antarctica. And so to give you some perspective, if we look at the globe from the bottom, we can see our South Pole here. And you can see that there is no other land, no other big continent that would stop winds from just blowing all the way around the Earth, so they can just keep circling and circling. So the winds and the ocean currents can keep circling around Antarctica. Now here, this area here, this is the southern part of South America. I'm going to just jump back to the last slide here. So what I'm circling is just the bottom tip of South America. So Chile and Argentina actually get really close to the northern tip of Antarctica. And this area between the northern tip of Antarctica and the southern tip of South America is known as the Drake Passage. And I encourage you to go on to Google or YouTube and look at videos of research ships that travel across the Drake Passage to go from South America to Antarctica, because it is so windy and so wavy that the boats are rocking back and forth, and the people on those boats have to tie down their computers and their chairs and everything because it does get so wavy and so dangerous. It's also one of the reasons, because it's so windy and wavy, it was really dangerous for a lot of ships to try to get close to Antarctica, to the South Pole. Now, you probably knew that Antarctica was cold, but it is the coldest place on Earth. With an average temperature, so if you took the temperature every day for a whole year and then got the average of that, it would be minus 18 degrees Celsius. And that's pretty cold, but probably not as cold as what you were thinking. But that includes all the warm temperatures from their summer and all the cold temperatures from their winter. And admittedly, they don't get too many warm summer days. But more importantly, this is the average temperature for the whole continent. And just like in Canada, which is a very big country, we have areas that are quite warm and areas that are quite cold. And I'll show you in the next slide. The same is true for Antarctica. So this is the average, but it can be very different and is very different across the Antarctic continent. What might surprise you is that it is the windiest place on Earth. And because, as I was saying, there's not another landmass that stops the wind from circling around Antarctica, the wind can get very high. It can regularly have wind speeds that get close to 150 kilometers an hour. You think, wow, that's pretty fast, but how fast really is that? Well, if in the rest of the world, a hurricane is defined as sustained winds that keep happening, greater than about 120 kilometers an hour. And in Antarctica, I told you it was 150 kilometers an hour that it could regularly have wind speeds that reach that level. In Antarctica, we don't call it a hurricane, but they are hurricane wind speeds and sometimes even greater. Probably the most surprising fact is that Antarctica is the driest place on Earth. It is a desert. You think, how is this possible? Well, it's because it's so cold that it looks like it gets lots of snow, but in fact it gets very little snow, only about 5 centimeters a year. But it just never really melts. And compare that to Hamilton, which gets about 84 centimeters of precipitation a year. And so some of you probably don't know what the word precipitation means. Precipitation means rain and snow and sleet and hail, any kind of water that's falling from the sky, whether it be in the form of snow or hail or rain. Antarctica only gets about 5 centimeters. Compare that to Hamilton, which gets about 85 centimeters every year. So a huge difference. So it is the coldest place on Earth, it is the windiest place on Earth, and even though it's got lots of snow, it is a desert. Oh, another really cool thing is when we see snow that comes in Hamilton, it's all nice and fluffy and got beautiful looking crystals. But the snow in Antarctica has been around for so long that it actually feels more like sand than it does like the snow that we get around Hamilton, which we can make nice packing snow and throw snowballs. The snow in Antarctica, because it's been around so long, most of the nice little crystals have all kind of broken up, and it actually is more like sand than it is like snow. That kind of surprised me when I was down there. Now, when I told you that the average temperature was about minus 18 for the whole year, that's true. But depending on where you are in Antarctica, the temperatures are very, very different. The 3 separate temperatures at the 3 American research stations in Antarctica: the South Pole Station, the Palmer Station in Graham Land, and McMurdo Station on Ross Island. So 3 different areas with 3 very different temperatures. So this was taken on April 16th this year, and we have a temperature at the Palmer Station out here at only minus 2 degrees Celsius on April 16th. And with a wind chill, it was about minus 6. That was about the temperature of Hamilton. So not that much different. At McMurdo Station on the same day at around the same time, the temperatures here, minus 28. With the wind chill, they reached minus 42. So even though it's still in Antarctica, the temperature was a lot colder. And then the coldest place, the South Pole, temperature minus 42. So even colder than McMurdo Station. And because it's windier there, as you can see, 27 knots versus 15 knots, the wind chill made it even colder. Okay, minus 65 degrees Celsius. I got to tell you that if you went to school at the South Pole, most every day would be a snow day. You would be going nowhere because it's so cold outside that being outside with some exposed skin for even a few minutes would give you very bad frostbite. So, even though the temperature on average across the whole continent is not too bad, if you don't like the cold, you probably want to be a researcher that works at Palmer Station. If you don't mind the cold, then you can work at the South Pole. The other thing that's really cool about Antarctica that you probably didn't know is that almost the entire continent is covered in a thick ice sheet, such that only about 2% of it is not covered in a thick ice sheet. 98% of it is. So if we took Antarctica and we cut it in half, and the brown area here is Antarctica and the blue is the ice sheet, you can see that really the only areas of Antarctica that aren't truly covered with an ice sheet are the tops of these mountains. And so when I show you pictures in the next section of the Antarctic landscape, remember that what you're looking at are probably the tops of the mountains rather than just the ground as it normally is. And so most of the mountain is still under that ice sheet and you didn't even know it. And in the thickest areas of Antarctica, the ice sheet can be up to 4 kilometers thick. That's really, really thick. Some researchers have speculated and calculated that if this ice sheet melted off of Antarctica, that the whole continent would rise up because of the weight of this ice sheet is actually squishing it down. Now, because it's the coldest place on Earth, the windiest place on Earth, the driest place on Earth, and pretty much the whole continent is covered in an ice sheet, it's probably not surprising to you that almost nothing lives in Antarctica, right? As far as plant life, it's mostly like algae and lichens and mosses. And if you don't know what those are, you should look them up. But you've probably seen moss if you've walked around any of the forests in your neighborhood or around where you live. Okay? Most of that plant life is going to be around Graham Land, that little peninsula where it wasn't too cold. And as far as animal life, some small little mites and worms, and some insects, again, mostly around Graham Land and along the coast, but very few anywhere else. But in contrast to how little life is on the Antarctic land, the ocean is filled with tons of different types of sea life, from planktons, which fish and whales love to eat, fish, squid, seals, whales, and of course our most popular Antarctic seabird, you got it, the penguin. Something that I find really fascinating about Antarctica was how the discovery of Antarctica took so long because it's so difficult to get to, that even the first people to make it to the South Pole took a long, long time. In fact, it wasn't until 1911 that explorers actually made it to the South Pole. And the race to be the first to get to the South Pole actually became a real race happening at the same time. It wasn't meant to be a race, but it turned into one. So a British researcher named Robert Falcon Scott had set up camp at Ross Island and was headed to become the first researcher and explorer to get to the South Pole. So part of their stuff on their way to going to the South Pole, they wanted to collect scientific samples for scientists back in Britain on the way there. And they found out that a Norwegian explorer, Roald Amundsen, had actually come to the Bay of Whales area and was trying to make it to the South Pole at the same time. So it essentially became like a race to get to the South Pole. Even though Scott didn't plan on it being a race, Amundsen came there and said, hey, let's see who can make it to the South Pole first. And what ended up happening is the Norwegian researcher Amundsen made it to the South Pole first on December 14th, 1911. And their explorer team made it to the South Pole and headed back to their ship before Scott had gotten there about a month later on January 17th, 1912. So about a month later, Scott got to the South Pole only to realize that Amundsen had already been there and left. And on their way back, they suffered some very tragic problems, and eventually they died about 11 kilometers away from a depot of food and other resources that they'd left for themselves, and never made it back. And that explorer team, the Scott explorer team, unfortunately died on the way back. But if you like explorer stories, the stories of Scott and Amundsen trying to explore the South Pole is particularly fascinating story. And I encourage you to go on to even just Google and look at the pictures and the things that they used to get to the South Pole, because it's pretty fascinating, the things that they used to get down there. And think about, if you were to go to the South Pole now, what types of things would you use as an explorer to get there? For some of the older kids who like geography, I have a little trivia question here for you. The geographic South Pole is expressed in latitude, 90 degrees south latitude, but no longitude. Why is that? All right. And for the rest of us, I've got a few Internet Explorer scavenger hunt things I want you to figure out. So use some reliable internet sources and get somebody to help you if you need it. The United States Antarctic Program website has some really cool facts and resources available for you, so that's a good place to start. But I want you to think about the differences between what are fast ice, pack ice, and icebergs. That's important as we get into the next talks. When is the Antarctic summer? When does the sun rise and the sun set? On June 1st and December 1st at McMurdo Station. And much like I showed you the temperatures from April 16th, what are the current temperatures on the day you're looking? With and without wind chill at McMurdo and the South Pole Station. As well, if you go to the United States Antarctic Program website, you can actually see live video camera footage of those research stations, which is pretty neat to do. I like to go there and just look and see what's going on at the station. And then finally, from a research perspective, this is a good one for the older kids. What is the Antarctic Treaty and what does it mean for doing research down in Antarctica? All right, we'll see you in Block 2.
That concludes the first part of Dr. Hawke's lecture. Do you have any questions for Dr. Hawke? Make sure to write down your questions and send them in to us at mcyu@mcmaster.ca. Tune in next week for the second part of Dr. Hawke's lecture. Bye for now. We would also like to take a moment to say a special thank you to our sponsors. Their support has made this program possible. And last but not least, we would especially like to thank you,